Have you ever felt like you're your own worst enemy? That no matter how hard you try, something inside you constantly sabotages your progress? You're not alone. Today, we're going to explore one of the most fascinating and frustrating phenomena of the human mind, self-sabotage. And we'll do it guided by one of the most profound and revolutionary thinkers in psychology, Carl Gustav Jung. Think for a moment. How many times have you been on the verge of achieving something important and suddenly made decisions that pulled you away from your goal? Maybe you abandoned that project just when it was about to bear fruit. Or perhaps you sabotaged that promising relationship when things started to get serious. Or maybe you've postponed again and again that change in habit that you know would transform your life. This pattern isn't coincidence or weakness. According to Carl Jung, it's the result of deeply rooted beliefs that exist in your unconscious. Beliefs that formed long before you had the ability to question them, and that now, silently, direct your life from the shadows. Jung, with his extraordinary vision of the human psyche, offers us not just an explanation for this phenomenon, but also a path to free ourselves from it. Through his work with the unconscious, the shadows, and the process of individuation, Jung shows us how we can confront that internal saboteur and transform it into our most powerful ally. In the next few minutes, we're going to explore together what self-sabotage really is from a Jungian perspective, where these limiting beliefs that hold us back come from, and most importantly, how we can heal them to finally consciously choose our path. Because, as Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Today is the day to take the reins of that fate. Have you noticed that no matter how many self-help books you read, no matter how many positive affirmations you repeat, there's something deeper that seems to resist change? Jung had an explanation for this. For him, our mind is not limited to what we consciously know. There's an entire universe beneath the surface, the unconscious. And it's precisely there where our patterns of self-sabotage originate. Jung divided the unconscious into two parts: the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious. The personal unconscious contains repressed experiences, forgotten memories, and aspects of ourselves that we have denied. The collective unconscious, on the other hand, is a reservoir of experiences shared by all humanity throughout its history. When we experience self-sabotage, we're seeing in action what Jung called the shadow. The shadow is the set of all those aspects of ourselves that we have relegated to the unconscious because they didn't fit with the image we wanted to project. They are the parts of us that we consider unacceptable, shameful, or threatening. Think about it this way. From an early age, we learn which behaviors are good and which are bad, which parts of ourselves are acceptable and which aren't. And everything we catalogue as unacceptable doesn't disappear. We simply push it into the shadows of the unconscious. But from there, it continues to influence our decisions, emotions, and behaviors. For example, if you grew up in an environment where expressing negative emotions was punished, you probably relegated your anger, your sadness, or your frustration to the shadow. But those emotions didn't disappear. They're there, accumulating energy, waiting for the moment to manifest. And they will, often in ways that sabotage what you consciously desire. This is the key to understanding self-sabotage. It's not that a part of you wants to fail. It's that there are aspects of yourself that you haven't recognized, that you haven't integrated, and that are demanding to be heard in the only way they can, by interrupting your plans, derailing your goals, making you make decisions that contradict your conscious intentions. Jung insisted that we can't simply ignore the shadow. Trying to repress these aspects even more will only strengthen their negative influence. The only true solution is to confront them, recognize them, and eventually integrate them. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people, Jung said. And this also applies to our self-sabotage. Knowing and accepting those dark parts, those limiting beliefs, those deep fears, is the first step to freeing ourselves from their control. Now, where exactly do these beliefs that limit us come from? For Jung, they form primarily in our early childhood. through our experiences with authority figures, especially our parents or caregivers. Think of a small child who makes a mistake and is harshly criticized. This child, who is still forming their sense of identity, may internalize the idea that they are not good enough, that they don't deserve success or love. This belief is not conscious. It settles deep in their psyche and from there influences every decision they make. Or imagine a girl who is constantly told that she must be perfect to be loved. This girl will probably develop an unconscious belief that any imperfection makes her unworthy of love. How will this manifest in her adult life? Perhaps as a paralyzing perfectionism that prevents her from even trying things for fear of failing, or as relationships where she demands an impossible standard of herself, inevitably sabotaging them. Jung observed that these limiting beliefs are not simply abstract ideas, they are embodied in what he called complexes. A complex is a group of emotionally charged thoughts, feelings, and memories that cluster around a common theme. For example, someone may have an inferiority complex that activates every time they face a new professional challenge, causing them to sabotage opportunities for advancement. The fascinating thing about complexes is that they act almost like autonomous entities within our psyche. Jung described them as partial personalities that can temporarily take control of our thoughts and behaviors. Have you ever had the experience of doing something and then wondering, why did I do that? You were probably under the influence of a complex. These limiting beliefs are reinforced throughout our lives through what Jung called synchronicity. We tend to notice and give importance to events that confirm our deep beliefs, while ignoring contradictory evidence. If you unconsciously believe that you don't deserve success, your mind will filter your experience to confirm this belief, creating a cycle of self-sabotage that perpetuates itself. But here's the good news. Just as these beliefs were formed through experiences, they can be transformed through new experiences, especially those involving consciousness. Jung was emphatic on this point. Consciousness is healing. Bringing to light what was in darkness is, in itself, the first step toward liberation. And it's not about getting rid of the shadow, but about integrating it. Jung used the term individuation to describe this process of becoming conscious of all aspects of oneself, even the darkest ones, and finding a way to live that includes all these facets of your being. This integration doesn't happen overnight. It's a path, sometimes difficult, that requires courage to look at what we've preferred not to see, compassion toward those wounded parts of ourselves, and patience with the process. Perhaps you're wondering, how can I identify those limiting beliefs that are sabotaging my life? Jung offered several avenues of access to the unconscious, and one of the most powerful was paying attention to our disproportionate emotional reactions. When you react excessively to a situation, when you feel an emotion that seems not to correspond with what's happening, it's likely that you've touched one of these deep beliefs. For example, if you become disproportionately furious when someone gives you minor criticism, that reaction may be revealing an underlying belief about your personal worth. Another important clue is recurring patterns in your life. If you notice that certain situations repeat themselves over and over again, relationships that always end in the same way, opportunities that always go wrong for similar reasons, you're probably seeing the effect of a limiting belief acting from your unconscious. Dreams were also, for Jung, a privileged window to the unconscious. Paying attention to your dreams, especially those that impact you emotionally or that repeat, can offer you glimpses of what's happening beneath the surface of your conscious mind. But identifying these beliefs is only the first step. The real work is in transforming them. And here is where Jung's vision becomes truly revolutionary, because for him, these beliefs are not simply errors to correct, but messengers that bring us vital information about ourselves. Each limiting belief, each pattern of self-sabotage, contains a seed of truth, a legitimate need, an aspect of ourselves that is asking for attention and recognition. It's not about eliminating the shadow, but about understanding what it's trying to tell us. For example, if your self-sabotage takes the form of chronic procrastination, instead of simply forcing yourself to be more disciplined, the Jungian approach would invite you to ask yourself, what is this procrastination trying to protect you from? Perhaps from a fear of failure that is too painful to face consciously? Or maybe from a success that, unconsciously, you believe you don't deserve. Jung taught us that the path to healing doesn't consist of suppressing or controlling these tendencies, but in establishing a dialogue with them. In his technique of active imagination, Jung invited his patients to personify these parts of themselves and to converse with them as if they were characters in an internal drama. This approach allows the conflicting perspectives within us to express themselves and eventually find an integration. This process of integration is what Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity of the psyche to create a new position that transcends the apparently irreconcilable opposites. It's not about your conscious part defeating the shadow, but about finding a third position that honors the truths contained in both. For Jung, this integration was much more than a therapeutic technique. It was the very purpose of human life. Through the process of individuation, the path of knowing, accepting, and integrating all aspects of oneself, we become more complete, more authentic people, and paradoxically, more capable of genuinely relating to others. Because when we stop projecting our shadows onto others, when we stop fighting against parts of ourselves, we release an enormous amount of psychic energy that was previously trapped in this internal conflict. This energy is now available to live more consciously, to make decisions aligned with our deepest values, to connect in more meaningful ways. But perhaps you're wondering, what does this look like in practice? How can I begin to transform these beliefs that limit me? The first step, as we've already seen, is to make them conscious. This requires attentive observation of your behavior patterns, your emotional reactions, and your dreams. Ask yourself, in what areas of my life do I repeatedly experience the same problems? What situations trigger intense emotional reactions in me that seem disproportionate? Once you've identified a pattern, ask yourself what underlying belief might be feeding it. For example, if you constantly sabotage relationships when they begin to become serious, might you have an unconscious belief that you don't deserve to be loved, or perhaps that intimacy is dangerous? The second step is to investigate the origin of this belief. Here, Jung invites us to look to our childhood, to those formative experiences that shaped our view of the world and of ourselves. Were there explicit or implicit messages that you received about your worth, about what is possible for you, about how the world works? Understanding the origin of a belief takes away much of its power, because it allows us to see it for what it is, not an absolute truth about us or about reality, but simply an interpretation that we formed at a moment in our lives, often when we were too young to have perspective. The third step is to question the truth of this belief. Here it is useful to remember the distinction that Jung made between psychological truth and objective truth. A belief can feel true. It may have been psychologically true in the context in which it was formed, without being objectively true here and now. Ask yourself, is it really true that I don't deserve success? Is it really true that showing vulnerability will inevitably lead to rejection? Look for evidence that contradicts these beliefs, moments in your life that demonstrate a different reality. The fourth step is to begin to act in ways that contradict the limiting belief. This is crucial because, as Jung well knew, the unconscious responds not only to words but to actions. Every time you act in a way that challenges a limiting belief, you are sending a powerful message to your unconscious. Finally, the fifth step is to integrate the energy contained in that limiting belief. Remember, according to Jung, even our most problematic aspects contain vital energy that we need. It's not about getting rid of parts of ourselves, but about transforming their expression. For example, if you've identified a pattern of perfectionism that sabotages you, the goal is not to eliminate your desire for excellence, but to transform that rigid perfectionism into a healthy commitment to quality. It's not about destroying the shadow, but about dialoguing with it until you find a form of expression that serves your life instead of sabotaging it. This process is neither easy nor quick. As Jung said, there is no birth of consciousness without pain. Confronting our shadows, questioning beliefs that have been with us all our lives, requires courage. But the result, a life lived more consciously, with greater inner freedom, is well worth the effort. And although the path may seem difficult, you are not alone in it. Jung firmly believed in the innate capacity of the psyche to heal, in what he called the self-regulating function of the unconscious. Within you there exists a wisdom that continually pushes you toward integrity and authenticity, even when you're not conscious of it. This wisdom manifests in many forms, through your dreams, sudden intuitions, significant synchronicities in your life. Jung invites us to pay attention to these signs, to establish a conscious relationship with that inner wisdom that is always working for your benefit, even when it seems like you're sabotaging yourself. Because paradoxically, even self-sabotage can be seen as an attempt by your psyche to establish a balance, to call your attention to aspects of yourself that you have been ignoring. Seen this way, self-sabotage is not your enemy, but a messenger, perhaps clumsy but sincere, that is trying to communicate something important to you. For example, if you find yourself constantly sabotaging your efforts toward a professional goal, perhaps part of you recognizes that that goal is not really aligned with your deepest values. Or if you sabotage relationships when they begin to deepen, perhaps there are unresolved intimacy wounds that need attention before you can fully commit. Jung teaches us to see these patterns not as failures to overcome, but as signals to interpret. Each act of self-sabotage is an opportunity to know yourself more deeply, to establish a more honest dialogue with yourself, to advance on that path of individuation that leads us toward a more authentic and full life. And as you advance on this path, something extraordinary begins to happen. Your relationships change. When you have recognized and integrated more aspects of your own shadow, you project less onto others. You can see them more clearly without the distortion of your own unconscious fears and desires. This opens the door to more authentic and satisfying connections. Your relationship with failure and success also changes. When you have faced your deepest fears, when you have questioned those limiting beliefs about what you deserve or what is possible for you, failure loses much of its power to devastate you, and success no longer feels like a threat to your identity. And perhaps most importantly, your relationship with yourself changes. Jung believed that many of our psychological problems arise from an alienation from our essential nature, from living lives that don't reflect who we really are. As you advance in the process of recognizing and integrating all parts of yourself, you experience a deep sense of coming home, of reconciliation with your most authentic self. This reconciliation doesn't mean that you will never again experience internal conflicts or moments of self-sabotage. Jung was realistic about human nature and knew that the shadow never completely disappears. Individuation is not a final destination, but a continuous process of growth and discovery. But with each step you take on this path, with each limiting belief you identify and transform, with each aspect of your shadow that you recognize and integrate, you become more capable of choosing consciously. Self-sabotage loses its grip on you because it no longer needs to communicate through symptoms. Now, you can listen directly to what those parts of you are trying to say. And this is perhaps Jung's most liberating teaching, that we don't need to be perfect to live full and meaningful lives. In fact, it is precisely through our imperfections, our shadows, our wounds, that we find our common humanity and our unique individuality. What you deny submits you, what you accept transforms you, Jung said. When you stop fighting against parts of yourself, when you stop trying to conform to an impossible ideal of perfection, you release an enormous amount of creative energy. This energy, which was previously trapped in repression and internal conflict, is now available to live, love, create, and contribute. And so, paradoxically, it is by fully accepting who we are, with all our contradictions, our fears, our shadows, that we become capable of changing. It's not by repressing or forcing ourselves, but by understanding and accepting ourselves that we find the freedom to choose something different. This is the gift that Jung offers us, A vision of psychological healing that doesn't consist of conforming to an external norm, but in discovering and living our uniqueness. An approach to self-sabotage that doesn't see it as a failure to overcome, but as a message to decipher. A path of growth that doesn't promise us perfection, but authenticity. Does this resonate with you? Have you felt that internal struggle? That saboteur who seems to conspire against your best intentions? Or maybe you've experienced moments of deep connection with yourself, where all parts of you seem to work in harmony. I'd love to hear your experiences and reflections. Share them in the comments. And if this video has made you reflect, if it has illuminated something in you, consider sharing it with someone who you think might benefit from these ideas. Sometimes, the simple act of naming something we've been experiencing, of knowing that it has a name, that others have studied and understood it, can be tremendously liberating. If you want to delve deeper into Jung's ideas, I recommend starting with his own writings, especially Man and His Symbols, a book he wrote specifically for a non-specialized audience. There are also excellent biographies like Jung, a biography by Deirdre Baer, which offer a more complete vision of his life and thought. And of course, if you feel that your patterns of self-sabotage are seriously affecting your life, consider seeking help from a trained professional, ideally someone familiar with depth psychology and the Jungian approach. Remember, the path to authenticity is not easy, but as Jung said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. Self-sabotage, seen correctly, can be the beginning of that awakening. Thank you for joining me in this exploration of Jung's wisdom about self-sabotage and limiting beliefs. If you like this video, don't forget to like it, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more content on depth psychology, personal growth, and the search for an authentic life. And before I go, I'd like to leave you with a question to reflect on. What would happen if, instead of seeing your failures as problems to solve, you began to see them as messages to decipher? What might they be trying to tell you about your deepest needs, your values, your unique path in this life? Because perhaps, as Jung suggested, it is not by eliminating our shadows, but by dialoguing with them, that we find our way to the light. It is not by rejecting parts of ourselves, but by embracing them all, that we become whole. This is the paradoxical and liberating message that Jung left us, that it is precisely through our wounds, our contradictions, our self-sabotage, that we find the path to our deepest healing and fulfillment. So today, when you find yourself facing that impulse to sabotage something important, when you feel that inner voice telling you that you're not enough or that you don't deserve what you desire, pause, breathe, and instead of fighting against that voice or surrendering to it, ask it, what are you trying to protect? What do you need to feel safe? What wisdom do you have to offer me? And then listen, not with judgment but with curiosity, not looking for an immediate solution but a deeper understanding, because as Jung taught us, it is in that space of attentive listening that true transformation begins. Thank you for being here. See you in the next video, where we'll continue exploring together the fascinating path toward a more conscious, more authentic, and more full life.